My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. She never called on weekdays. She was always busy with the salon, with her kids, with whatever was happening in her corner of Memphis. So when her name lit up my phone at 8:47 in the morning, I set down my coffee and answered on the second ring. She didn't say hello. "Daddy, I need to tell you something before you hear it from somebody else." I sat down. She told me that my son had decided to move the family reunion to Gatlinburg this year, a long weekend at a cabin resort, Friday through Sunday, already booked, already paid for, already planned, and she had just found out that my name was not on the guest list. I didn't say anything for a moment. "He said the cabin only holds so many people," she said, "and that you and he have been, tense." I thanked her for calling. I told her I was fine. I hung up and sat there looking at the window for a long time. My son's name is Gerald. He is 51 years old. He has my mother's nose and his mother's temper, and for the last 3 years we have been in a kind of cold war that neither of us ever officially declared. It started, as these things often do, over money. But like most arguments that start over money, it was never really about money at all. Let me go back a little. My wife, Evelyn, passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer. We had been married 34 years, and when she died, something in the architecture of our family shifted in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. Gerald was the oldest. My daughter Patricia was the middle. My youngest, Marcus, lived out in Phoenix and called on birthdays and Christmas with the kind of careful regularity that told you exactly how much distance he was trying to maintain. After Evelyn died, I kept the house, 4 bedrooms, on a quiet street in Cordova, Tennessee, a yard I had mowed every Saturday for 26 years, a kitchen where my wife had made Sunday dinners that could pull the whole family together no matter what was going on between them during the week. Gerald moved back in about 8 months after his mother died. He said it was to help me. He said the house was too big for one person. He said he just needed a few months to get back on his feet after his divorce came through. That was 9 years ago. In those 9 years, Gerald had lived in my house, eaten at my table, used my second car when his needed repairs, and borrowed money on 7 separate occasions, amounts that ranged from $300 to $11,000. I kept no formal record. I am not that kind of man. I believed him each time he said he would pay it back, and I let it go each time I understood that he wouldn't. What I did keep track of, in the quiet way a man keeps track of things he doesn't want to speak aloud, was everything else. I paid his phone bill for 14 months when he lost his job at the freight company. I co-signed a personal loan so he could start a landscaping business that lasted 1 summer. I watched his 2 boys, my grandsons, Darnell and Corey, 3 days a week for 2 years when Gerald was working and his ex-wife had gone back to school. I loved those boys like they were my own second chance. I picked them up from school, helped with homework, taught Darnell how to fish at Shelby Farms. I was present in the way that I knew how to be present. I did all of this without complaint, because that is what a father does, and because I had made a promise to Evelyn the last week of her life that I would keep this family together. She had squeezed my hand and said, "Don't let them drift." I had said I wouldn't. I kept that promise for 9 years. The tension with Gerald started at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He brought a woman named Rochelle to dinner. I had nothing against Rochelle. She was pleasant and laughed easily, and brought a sweet potato pie that was genuinely excellent. But that same weekend, Gerald told me he wanted to put Rochelle's name on the deed of the house. My house, as a show of commitment, he said, as a way of building something serious with her. I said no. He stopped speaking to me for 6 weeks. When he came back around, we never talked about it directly again, but something had calcified between us. He started making comments at family gatherings, small things, the kind that could be laughed off as jokes if you called him on them, but that landed with the precision of something carefully aimed. Comments about how I was set in my ways, about how the house needed updating and I refused to do anything about it, about how I had checked out since his mother died. I let it go. I let it go. I let it go. Then came the reunion. The family reunion had been Evelyn's tradition. She started it in 1987, the summer after her mother passed, as a way of holding everyone together. For 37 years, it had happened every August without exception. After she died, I kept it going. I organized it. I funded most of it. I reserved the shelters at the park. I ordered the custom T-shirts. I drove to pick up the older relatives who couldn't drive themselves. I did it because she had asked me to keep the family together, and this was the most visible way I knew how. Gerald had decided, apparently, that this year he was taking it over. Gatlinburg, a cabin resort. 31 family members, according to Patricia, who had gotten the itinerary forwarded to her by accident. 31 family members, and I was not among them. I did not call Gerald that day. I did not call him the next day either. What I did was think. I thought about it the way I think about most things that matter. Slowly, over coffee in the morning, on my walks in the evening, in the quiet of the house at night. I am 67 years old. I have buried a wife, outlasted a career, raised 3 children, and loved a family that has sometimes loved me, back in ways that were difficult to feel. I have learned that the most important decisions a man makes are the ones he makes when he is calm. Anger is a compass. It tells you where the wound is, but you don't make decisions with a compass. You make them with your whole mind after you've been still long enough to see clearly. So I sat with it, and what I saw when I was still enough to see it was this. For 9 years, I had been the floor this family walked on, not the ceiling. They never looked up at me with much appreciation, but the floor, solid, dependable, always there, never acknowledged until something cracked. Gerald had not invited me to the reunion that I had funded and organized for 11 consecutive years. He had not called to explain. He had not apologized. He had simply arranged things, made decisions, sent out itineraries, and assumed, as people always assume about floors, that I would simply remain beneath them without comment. I decided to stop being the floor. I called my bank on Thursday morning. I had set up an automatic transfer 2 years prior, a monthly contribution to a joint family account that had been used to cover reunion costs, holiday gatherings, and occasional help for family members in need. Gerald had access to this account. Patricia had access. Marcus technically had access, though he had never once used it. I canceled the automatic transfer. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Beverly Kane, and she has handled my affairs for 16 years. I told her I wanted to update my estate documents. I told her I wanted to remove Gerald as a primary executor and replace him with Patricia. I told her I wanted to re-examine the arrangements I had made regarding the house. She asked if everything was all right. I said it was. I told her I was just getting my affairs in order, which was something a 67-year-old man had every right and reason to do. She had the updated documents ready by the following Tuesday. Then I called a real estate agent named Howard, who had sold 2 homes on my street in the past year. I asked him to come, take a look at the house, and give me his honest assessment of what it might fetch in the current market. He came on Friday morning, walked through every room with the careful attention of a man who has learned to see past furniture and paint, and told me a number that was considerably higher than I expected. I thanked him and told him I would be in touch. I also made a phone call to my cousin Raymond, who lived in a 2-bedroom house in Germantown and had been after me for years to move closer to him. Raymond was 71 and a widower, and we had been friends since before we were family. He had a finished basement with a separate entrance that he rented out occasionally. He told me it was currently empty. He told me it was mine whenever I wanted it. I was not rushed. I was not frantic. I moved through each of these steps the same way I had mowed that yard for 26 years, steady, unhurried, committed to finishing what I started. I did not tell Gerald any of this. I want to be clear about something. I was not doing this out of spite. I have known spiteful men, and I have seen what that particular hunger does to them over time. It hollows them out, it makes them small, in a way that no amount of winning can fill back up. This was not about making Gerald hurt the way I had been hurt. This was something quieter and more serious than that. This was me understanding, finally and completely, that I had organized my life around people who had stopped organizing their lives around me, and that I was old enough and tired enough and clear-eyed enough to stop. Evelyn had asked me to keep the family together. I had kept that promise for 11 years after her death, but she had never asked me to disappear inside of it. She had never asked me to be a resource rather than a person. I do not think she would have wanted that. I know she wouldn't have. The reunion weekend arrived. Friday morning, I loaded a single carload of the things that mattered most to me. Photographs, my good cast iron, the quilt Evelyn had made the winter before she got sick, my fishing rods, a box of books, and I drove to Raymond's house in Germantown. Raymond helped me carry things in without asking a single unnecessary question, which is one of the things I have always loved about him. We had dinner that night at his kitchen table and talked until almost midnight about things that had nothing to do with any of this, and I slept better than I had in months. Gerald called on Saturday afternoon. I know this because I saw his name on my phone screen. I let it ring. He called again on Saturday evening. I let it ring again. Patricia called Sunday morning. I answered. "Daddy," she said. Gerald went by the house. "I know. He said your car is gone, and Howard, the realtor, he said a sign went up." "That's correct." There was a silence. "Are you selling the house?" "I'm considering my options," I said. "How is the reunion going?" She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the sound of children somewhere in the background, probably her grandkids. "It's fine," she said. "It's nice up here. The mountains are beautiful." Then she said more quietly, "You should be here, Daddy." "I agree," I said, but I wasn't invited. She didn't have an answer for that. Gerald showed up at Raymond's house on Monday evening. I don't know how he found out where I was. Probably Patricia, though I don't hold it against her. He sat down at Raymond's kitchen table across from me, and for a moment he just looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was a little boy and had broken something and was trying to figure out whether I already knew. "What are you doing?" he said. "Right now?" I was about to watch the game. "Dad, the house, Beverly Kane. What is happening?" I folded my hands on the table. I looked at my son. This man who had my mother's nose and 51 years of life behind him. And I thought about all the things I could say. I could have listed every loan, every favor, every Saturday I had given over to his children, every winter I had paid a bill he should have paid himself. I could have talked about Evelyn's tradition and what it meant and what it cost me to keep it going. I could have made him sit there and account for every year of accumulated taking. I didn't do any of that. "Gerald," I said, you planned a family reunion and didn't invite me. Your father. The man who has organized and funded that reunion for 11 years because your mother asked me to. You didn't call to tell me. You didn't ask what I thought. You sent out itineraries and made your arrangements and assumed I would just be here when you got back. He opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," I said. He closed it. "I have spent 9 years being useful to you in ways you stopped noticing a long time ago. I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because I think you genuinely stopped seeing it the way you stopped seeing furniture that's been in a room your whole life. I am not furniture, son. I am your father, and I am 67 years old, and I have decided that I am going to spend whatever time I have left being a person, not a resource." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. "I'm not writing you out of anything out of anger. What I'm doing is making decisions about my own life, my house, my money, where I live, how I spend my time, the same way you have apparently been making decisions about yours. Without asking me, without explaining yourself, just deciding." Gerald looked at the table for a long time. "I didn't think you'd care that much," he said finally. "About the reunion. You always acted like it was just an obligation." That landed in a complicated place, because there was a grain of something true in it. There had been years when the reunion had felt like labor more than celebration. But obligation and love are not opposites. Sometimes love looks exactly like showing up to something hard year after year because someone you loved asked you to. "It wasn't an obligation to your mother," I said, "and it wasn't an obligation to me. It was the last real thing I could do to keep a promise I made to her. And you took it over without a conversation?" He was quiet for a while after that. "What do I need to do?" he said. "I don't have a list for you, Gerald. This isn't a negotiation. You're my son, and I love you, and that doesn't have conditions. But I am moving into this house, and I'm going to live my life on terms that make sense for me, and you are going to have to learn to see me as a person rather than a piece of infrastructure. That's all I'm asking." He nodded slowly. It was not the nod of a man who fully understood yet. It was the nod of a man who was beginning to understand that there was more to understand. That was enough for now. He left about an hour later. He stopped at the door and turned around and said, I'm sorry, Dad. I mean that. I believed him. I also knew that an apology is a beginning, not a resolution. It is the first word of a longer conversation, not the last. I did not move back into the house on Cordova. I listed it formally 2 weeks later. It sold in 9 days. Howard had been right about the market. I took those proceeds and made decisions that were entirely my own. I kept what I needed. I was deliberate about the rest. I am still at Raymond's, for the time being. We play chess on Tuesday nights and watch baseball on weekends and cook on Sundays with the same unhurried attention that good cooking requires. Patricia calls twice a week. Gerald calls on Sundays, and the conversations are shorter than they used to be, but more honest. Marcus called last month, out of nowhere, just to talk, and we spoke for an hour and a half about things I didn't know he still thought about. That surprised me in a good way. Darnell, my older grandson, came by last week on his own. He is 19 now and figuring out what kind of man he wants to be, which is hard work at any age. We sat on Raymond's back porch and he asked me questions about his grandmother that no one had ever asked me before. What she had been like when she was young, what she had wanted to be before she became a wife and mother, whether she had been happy. I answered every question as honestly as I could, and then I told him the thing that I wish someone had told me when I was his age, that love is not the same as self-erasure, that you can give generously and still keep your own shape, that the people worth keeping in your life will love you more, not less, when you refuse to disappear. He listened the way young people listen when something is reaching them somewhere they didn't expect. I don't know if I did everything right. I have turned it over enough times to know that there are things I could have said sooner, boundaries I could have named before they were crossed. So many times they became invisible. An older, wiser version of me might have had a conversation with Gerald 3 years ago that changed the whole arc of things, but I also know that I am not the man I was at 40 or 50. At 67, after the life I have lived and the losses I have carried, I understand something that I couldn't have understood any younger, that the people who love you are not always the same as the people who see you, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to stop making it so easy for them to look through you. Evelyn used to say that still water runs deep, and that the quietest rivers cut the deepest canyons. I used to think she was just talking about patience. Now I think she was talking about this, about what happens when a quiet man finally decides to move. I think she would have understood. I think, if I am honest, she would have smiled